Okay, you're on.
Late night from Willowdale, and it's actually not late night from Willowdale, it's early evening from Willowdale, and we're in Goulding Park, and we are in Willowdale, and it's great. I love being in this park. This is a sort of an area where I grew up. I went to high school around the corner here. I love Goulding Park, and yes, we're back in Willowdale, and there's so much going on in the world. What subject do we talk about? There's just, where do you begin, right? And but I think I'd like to start with so many headlines. I always like to show headlines because it sort of shows what's going on. But this is the headline that really hit me in the last week. The massacre in Indianapolis at the FedEx facility. The third big massacre in 3 months. 8 were killed. Gun violence in the United States is just, well, to say it's out of control would be an understatement. There have been 45 mass shootings in the United States in the last month. 45. Now, of course, there's probably even more now. That was a statistic that was out last week. And that's 4 or more killed. What is going on in the U.S.? And this stuff never gets addressed. It just, there's a couple of days of publicity. That's why I thought the New York Times headline here was interesting, because they mentioned the third massacre in 3 months. That's the third big massacre. But there have been 45 mass shootings in the last month in the U.S. So the U.S. is a society that is really screwed up, and that leads, and I can see why, many commentators have said this is why this happened. It's time to get out of Afghanistan, time to end the forever war in Afghanistan, and it's because the U.S. needs to focus on home, and there's so many problems in the United States, right? Racial issues. Look, there's another headline. At least Chauvin was found guilty of the... Oops, there, we missed that one because we got a bit of a wind here in Goulding Park. So Derek Chauvin was found guilty of the murder of George Floyd, so that at least brought some, reduced a bit of the racial tension. But there have been, everyone knows there. How many police? We were just talking about. There have been a number of police shootings even the last week in the U.S.
Well, 2 that I know of.
2, yeah. And then there's the huge polarization in the U.S. and this crazy sort of stuff that led to the riots on Capitol Hill, and just the extremist, nutty politics that are going on in the U.S. So, yeah, the United States is a country that needs to. It's true. The United States, as many commentators said, they need to withdraw. They need to withdraw from the world. And focus on domestic issues, because the United States in many ways is a country at war with itself, and so yeah, getting out of Afghanistan makes total sense, and they need to reduce their military footprint in other parts of the world as well. Don't get me wrong, I'm a realist. There's lots of nasty stuff going on in the world, and there's lots of crazy people. ISIS is active in southern Africa, Mozambique. ISIS is active in Somalia and the Sahel region of Central Africa, and so they need. These are crazy, nutty people, and they do need to be confronted. But as I've said in a recent post on two great books, Isolationism and. By Charles Kupchan, and Stephen Wertheimer's book. Now I see him forget the title, but that's okay. I posted it recently. Tomorrow the World. Tomorrow the World. Yeah, I'm getting old, right? Right. Those are great books that talk about American foreign policy and the history of how America became the most powerful country in the world after the Second World War, and they talk about U.S. foreign policy, but they always talk about the streak of isolationism that was in American foreign policy. And John Quincy Adams famously said let's not go abroad in search of monsters, and so now we're finding Americans are kind of fed up with being the policemen of the world, and the world will benefit from that. I think the world will benefit from a lesser American footprint on it. The U.S. So I think the Afghan decision was a good decision, and as I said in my recent post on my good friend Gabriel Coco, who passed away a number of years back, who wrote many books on American foreign policy, but would have been very happy because he often said the U.S. should just withdraw and go back home and then get rid of all its foreign bases and all its foreign entanglements and just withdraw. Now that's not going to happen. The Americans will still be in South Korea and in Japan, and those countries actually want them there. Germany actually wants a big American presence. Germany was actually annoyed when Trump was going to withdraw troops from Germany. The Germans don't mind the Americans being there. So, you know, there's obviously going to be an American footprint, but withdrawing somewhat from the world is a good thing. And they need to focus on domestic priorities. Come on. When you have 45 mass shootings in a month, you have a country full of nutties that would storm their national legislature, the U.S. Capitol, and you have all this racial tension that's been going on. It hasn't stopped since the Civil War. It continues, and inequality. Yeah. So, you know, I see Biden making some good things, pumping a lot of money in the economy, beginning to rethink America's role in the world. So I think it's a good thing. In terms of their relationship with China, which just takes up so much ink, you know, China's a competitor. I do believe, and I said this in a previous video, countries like China and Russia, we have to get along with them. Just have minimal relations. Obviously going to be trade relations, but you don't have to get all warm and fuzzy. China's a competitor, but call them out on human rights abuses, call them out on all sorts of things, and just have minimal relations with them. China's military is not that much of a threat. Okay, they spend less than 2% of their GDP on the military. If China was in NATO, the U.S. would be criticizing China for not spending enough on the military. Okay, China spends less than 2% of its GDP on the military, whereas we know that the U.S. spends so much on the military, more than any of its competitors combined. Okay, the U.S. spends. I don't even know what the statistic is. It's about 700 billion. It's so over the top. The U.S. has the most powerful military in the world by far. Nobody comes close. So China's not a military threat to anybody, and Russia's not so much either. You know, I always say Russia's a gas station in search of a country. That's a bit over the top to say that, but you know, Putin plays his weak hand very well. He's a threat. He's a threat to the Ukraine, and Russia's in many ways, a very weak country, and they're not that big a threat either. The threat of Russia and China are overplayed, and like I said, if China was in NATO, the United States would be criticizing them for not spending enough on the military, because they spend less than 2% of their GDP on the military. Nobody spends what the U.S. does on its military. Nobody. The U.S. is still the most powerful country in the world by far. I think China has 2 aircraft carriers. The U.S. has 11 very technically advanced aircraft carriers. So yeah, put that myth to rest. Anyways, I intended this to be a relatively short video, but there's so much to talk about. Yeah, there's a couple of. I'm going to do a post. This is a great book by Philip Gordon, Losing the Long Game. It's about U.S. policy in the Middle East and how it hasn't worked, and basically, yes, we're talking about getting out of the Middle East, the U.S. has definitely needs to reduce its footprint there. Regime change, we try to everything we try to do in the Middle East fails. The U.S. Sometimes you sometimes have to leave it up to the countries involved to sort it out. We intervened in Libya, and Libya is a failed state. It's a nasty failed state. Our interventions in Syria haven't done anything. We prop up all these fascist governments. Egypt is a torture chamber. So sometimes we just have to leave it alone, let countries sort it out for themselves. Another good book, The Arab Winter by Noah Feldman. The Arab Winter examines why the Arab Spring became the Arab Winter and how it failed. I call it the Arab Nightmare. These are two great books examining what's going on in the Middle East and how a lot of these, other than Tunisia, the Arab Spring failed. Going back to Afghanistan, which is a classic example, which is called the Graveyard of Empires, because the Brits were kicked out of there in the 19th century, the Russians were kicked out of there in the late 1980s, and the Americans now are leaving along with their NATO allies. The Taliban aren't nice. It's not going to be pretty what happens in Afghanistan after U.S. and NATO leaves by the end of the summer. It's not going to be a pretty situation. I see a civil war ensuing. The Afghan government's very weak, and no question, women have rights now, and it's very bleak. It's going to be a very bleak picture for women, and for civil rights in Afghanistan. But it's not our job to prop up these countries that are. It's just Afghanistan's a very tribal society, it's a very conservative society, and they have to sort it out for themselves. If there's going to be it's not the job of Canada, the United States, the Netherlands, to turn Afghanistan into a sort of Afghanistan will not be turned into Canada or the Netherlands or into Switzerland or to Norway. It's not going to be that kind of a place. It's going to be very nasty and brutish, I think, in the next couple of years. But the Afghans have to sort it out for themselves. And it's as Clete, as we were saying last week. You're thinking, well, maybe the Americans should have stayed there for a bit longer, but how long do you stay? I mean, the Taliban have support the Taliban has lots of support in Afghanistan, and so it's at some point you just gotta you gotta when to hold them, when to fold them. You gotta fold them sometimes, and we can't get into same with Syria and. Yeah, Syria is a bloody mess. Lots of failed states out there. Syria, Afghanistan. Pakistan is a failed state. There's a great book on Pakistan by Declan Walsh, New York Times. Veteran reporter, now reports out of Africa. But this is about Pakistan. Pakistan's a failed state. I always believe that Pakistan should never have been... the British decision to partition Pakistan and India was wrong. Pakistan and India should have still been one country. Pakistan is a failed state. It's the, how do you say it? It's got a nominally functioning government, but it's extremely violent place. It's become a very conservative religious place. It supported the Taliban. It's not a great. And the bottom line is, the United States gives them lots of aid. Pakistan plays both sides of the fence, right? They support crazy religious extremists, and yet they take American aid, and the money the U.S. gives them ends up killing American soldiers. It's all been very bizarre over the years. So what to do with failed states? That's a whole discussion. There's so many in the world, right? Libya, Pakistan, Afghanistan. Because Afghanistan is a barely functioning state now and will become a failed state. And in many ways, when you talk about failed states, I always think of the United States as, in many ways, a failed state. I know that's over the top, but it still functions, and obviously it's trying to repair itself, I think, under the Biden administration. I could go on and on about foreign affairs and all these things, and this is another good book, Shadows of Empire, again looking at empires and how empires shape the world, and in many ways how they fail. This is a good time for reflection, in world affairs, especially as the United States thinks about having a less interventionist role in the world, and maybe focusing on soft power, whether that be climate change or development aid or other things like that, focusing on the things that they can actually make positive contributions to, because invading countries and regime change just doesn't work. And I've rambled on a bit, and this video wasn't supposed to ramble on that much, but let's talk about and also on climate change. The New York Times had a piece the other day saying basically Canada is a fraud when it comes to climate change. Trudeau is big talk, but nothing happens here. And the emissions in Canada carbon emissions in Canada have gone up more than any other G7 country. And that's partly because of the oil industry, which I have no problems with. I have no problems with the oil industry. But Trudeau talks a big talk, and he's a bit of a joke on this. And I've never been a big fan of these big climate change conferences. I always believe it's the personal decisions people make that will affect stuff, like taking public transit, don't driving a car, don't have a big house, don't have a cottage. You know what I mean? Don't have, it's a personal decisions people make. And I always find a lot of environmentalists hypocritical. So, but that's another topic. Let's just end with this. COVID hysteria. Okay, look at all the magazines: Economist, Newsweek, Maclean's. It's all about vaccines. The Guardian Weekly, vaccines. Another piece of Newsweek on the COVID, and then Maclean's. And we are living in COVID. We're 13 months into this pandemic, and it's just the hysteria just doesn't seem to end. And I feel like people have just lost all perspective. The Spanish flu killed.
18 million or something?
Upwards of 150 to 100 million people.
Oh shit, sure. Was way off.
Yeah. And the population of the world was a lot less then, right? We have 7 billion people in the world now, and COVID has killed 3 million. We have all these technological advances. Now we have, amazingly, we have a vaccine within a year. We have a vaccine. So people are still scared of their own shadows. They won't take the subway. People are still petrified by COVID. Yeah, COVID is serious. It's killing people, and it has all these different variants, and now we're in a third wave. But COVID will never be eradicated. Okay, lots of diseases have not been eradicated, and you're gonna have to learn to live with it. And you can't keep shutting down the economy, opening up the economy, shutting it down. You're gonna have to learn to live with it. And I find the stuff about vaccine, and again, the vaccine stuff is just hysterical. Like, everyone asks you now, did you get a vaccine? Did you get a vaccine? And people are talking about vaccine passports. And,
I got a vaccine.
And I thought, you know what? Give it a rest. The vaccine rollout is happening. People will get their vaccines. And I find there's just this nutty hysteria that it's been going on for a year, and I find it tiresome. Like, people just, get a vaccine, if you want to get a vaccine, get a vaccine. I don't think the vaccines are going to be the panacea. This virus will probably come back. I think people should get a vaccine. I'll get one eventually, but I'm not part of this hysteria where you just have to run out and and line up for hours on end. I mean, I just think that people have lost perspective on COVID, and it's a nasty ass flu. It's a nasty ass flu that just kills kills people. The flu kills a lot of people too. And this year the flu has been irrelevant. It hasn't killed. The flu has not been an issue because COVID has basically taken it over. COVID is nasty. It's vicious. It kills people, no question. But keep perspective. You can still go out. You can go to the park. I always thought some of these restrictions were silly. Buying a book at a bookstore or going to a bar and having a beer, I don't think was ever an issue of spread. And we all know where spread came from in these big distribution centers and where people are heavily congregated in close places at work and stuff, and people who had big family gatherings and stuff like that. But I just find that we have lost total perspective on COVID, and we're 13 months into it, and people are still hysterical. And I just don't get it. Get your vaccine. We don't have hysteria over the flu. You know what I mean? And people die. Lots of people die every year because of the flu. This year, not so much because it's sort of transformed into COVID. But and also people, masks and stuff, and people taking precautions. The flu wasn't the issue. But yeah, the vaccines won't be the panacea either. So this virus is gonna keep coming back, and we're just gonna have to learn to live with it. Can't shut down everything forever. And this idea of vaccine passports is silly. I can see it for international travel, but I can't see it for everyday life. And yeah, I guess this video went on a bit longer than I wanted, and there's so much to talk about. So, but we're going to leave it there on this beautiful night in Willowdale, and having a few beers, because that's what you need to do when you're subject to all this barrage of depressing news. You got to have a beer. I tell people, get out fresh air. Get out and get some fresh air. Don't do stupid stuff, but get out and get some fresh air, and stop worrying about COVID every second, because that's not going to help you. COVID will leave. The Spanish flu did leave, okay? After all without all the technology and advances of modern science, it did leave. It killed a lot of people, but it did leave. And this virus may not totally leave, but it will end. This whole COVID will eventually leave the world. The viruses do. This one won't end, but like I said, the plagues end, and this one will end too. And of course, we have the advantage of science and technology now, so it'll probably end quicker. But I don't think it'll totally go away. So, anyways, I could ramble on about so much stuff, but that's it from late night from Goulding Park here in Willowdale.